This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today's February 13th, 2021, and I'm producer Pat. We have two interesting segments for you today. We're going to throw the whole show over to the Ottawa crew. Adam takes a deep dive into the so-called monoliths that were making headlines late last year. But first, Darren looks at vaccines and the post-hoc fallacy. I hope everyone out there is staying safe and healthy, and we will talk to you soon.
Today I'm going to talk to you about vaccines and the post-hoc fallacy. Listeners of the show will have heard me talk about this post-hoc fallacy before. The full name is post hoc ergo propter hoc, translated loosely as after that, therefore, because of that. This is a fallacy because establishing a causal link between two things requires more than just observing one thing following another. To take an absurd example, one morning last month I had some toast, and then Joe Biden was sworn in as president. Clearly the first event did not lead to the second. While people do make this error, examining events linked in time is a good start to understanding causality, right? You got to start somewhere. Yep. If your stomach rarely hurts, but starts to hurt an hour after eating some food, it is a decent hypothesis to think that perhaps the food caused the stomach hurting.
Mm-hmm. And you don't want to try it again because you don't want your stomach to hurt again.
One should investigate further. Yeah. Exactly. The point is not that one shouldn't think about post-hoc events being related causally. It is rather that it is fallacious to think causality is proved by simple temporal connection. Mm-hmm. We have repeatedly seen this with the completely false belief that vaccines cause autism. Young children get vaccinated around the time that some children will begin to show signs of autism. While it is not true that vaccines cause autism, I am sympathetic to the parent that sees, from that parent's perspective, an external, atypical event, injection of vaccines, and then emerging signs of autism spectrum disorder. It is hard to see the entirety of a situation from our limited perspective, but that is what we must do to better understand causality. Another example is that around 5% of cancers spontaneously go into remission. Clearly, it has something to do with what is happening inside those individuals, but there's no obvious external reason why this happens. This is relevant because there are so many people that visit the Vatican to pray to God to remove their cancer, that by these stats alone, some visitors will have the experience of having cancer, going to pray at the Vatican, coming home, and within a few months finding out that their cancer is in remission. From that individual's perspective, it is hard not to conclude that the prayer caused the remission. From the outside view, we can see that this is the post-hoc fallacy. It might have, but is that the best explanation?
We could study it, and they have, and those studies have not proven that prayer helps heal people.
Exactly. That said, if it turned out that visitors to the Vatican experience remission at something like 10 times the normal rate, that would be something to investigate for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, how is this relevant to the COVID vaccine? Well, the same logic applies. There will be many, many adverse events that follow from someone getting a COVID vaccine, but that does not mean we should conclude that the vaccine causes the adverse event. There was an article by Global News, linked in our show notes at trcpodcast.com.
Great website.
Describing how some elderly deaths in Norway were being attributed to the vaccine and how this was causing concern. In Norway, since mid-January, noting that this is recorded in early February, they have vaccinated about 45,000 people with the Pfizer-BioNTech shot, prioritizing the elderly and in nursing homes. And since slightly later in January, 33 deaths were reported. Those who died were 75 years old or older and had many serious diseases. In this particular situation, these deaths would be described as an adverse event following the vaccine, but that does not mean it is an adverse event directly related to the vaccine. Should this be investigated? Yes, and it is being investigated. Is it relevant that 40 million doses of the vaccine have been administered and such an increase in deaths hasn't been observed in various other countries? It sure is.
Worth considering when you're in a sort of end-of-life care facility or when you're in a nursing home and things like that. Often your life expectancy is 1, maybe 2 years. So for people to die in this situation is not shocking. This can be considered in the context of COVID deaths in such places, but also obviously in the context of people dying after vaccines. People die in these situations. It's tragic, but that's what's been going on.
This is true. In Canada, as of January 8th, we have had 24 adverse events following COVID-19 vaccines, but none directly linked to a life-threatening adverse event due to the vaccine. So we've given out thousands of vaccine doses, and less than 0.01% have resulted in adverse events. Just to clarify, in this public health medical context, anything bad that happens after a vaccine is labeled an adverse event. It does not mean it's causal. It just means, well, you had a vaccine, then you had an adverse event. Maybe you broke your leg, maybe you got the flu, doesn't matter. So I just want to really disentangle those two different things.
So it's not an adverse effect caused by the vaccine when you use that term.
Correct. It's just an adverse event that follows it. But someone might like, oh, look at all these adverse events following the vaccine. You're like, well, no, it's not causally linked though. So one could say they should have used better terms because the average person would be confused. It can be hard to get a sense of the scale of all the maladies that are happening all the time. In the United States alone, there are about 800,000 strokes a year, mostly among the elderly. Similarly, there's about 800,000 heart attacks. And think about all the other conditions, right? Even quickly, 800,000, you're like, okay, so that's what, 80,000 a month, right? Yeah. And you're in the thousands a day. Who's getting vaccines? Of course, there's going to be heart attacks and strokes shortly following someone getting a vaccine. Yeah. Given how many problems there are, how many vaccines there are, it's actually quite likely that a negative medical event would follow a vaccination within a day or two, possibly within hours. But the question is whether it is caused by that, and what we need for that is better evidence. Do the COVID vaccines cause side effects? They sure do. Yep. Fever, chills, headache, swelling, tiredness, and other low probability events. Does that mean you shouldn't get the vaccine? No, of course you should, unless you have a good medical reason. As unlikely as that might be, there are still some groups that are less suitable to get vaccines. To summarize, just because someone has a negative medical event after getting a COVID-19 vaccine does not mean the vaccine caused it. That's the post hoc fallacy. We need more evidence for a causal link. So that is my segment. But before I end, I wanted to engage in a hypothetical. What if the COVID vaccine caused more harm? Does that automatically mean people shouldn't take it? No, actually. One has to look at the current cost in human lives and social well-being. Given how many are dying from COVID and how many are suffering from COVID, depending on one's age and the severity of the problem, it could be perfectly reasonable to take the COVID vaccine even if it caused you some harm.
Yeah, I mean, you would almost have to compare it to, what was the likelihood if just COVID went rampant and everyone kind of was exposed to it and had a chance of getting it, and what's your death rate there, and then what's your risk of the vaccine? That may be not a perfect analogy because some people may just simply not be exposed to it before it sort of plays out its course, but there's a lot of factors. If it's like 0.0, even if it was like 0.01 death rate, maybe that's worth considering. Maybe that's worth doing, right?
Maybe. That'd be a bit of a personal choice. I mean, society might move in a certain direction, but I just wanted to highlight, the vaccine doesn't cause serious consequences. For some people it might, but even if it did, it might still be worth it. Yeah. Just try to think through all the different variables.
Yeah, and I know, I don't know about this vaccine specifically, but a lot of the very serious, deadly side effects of vaccines are usually in the 1 in a million type of range. Like they're very, very infrequent. I don't think there's a lot of this is a vaccine where you'll die and it's 1 in 1,000. I don't, that wouldn't get approved, right?
Unless the condition was so serious, then, But yes, correct. I think in normal circumstances, that would not.
Yeah. And I think mild flu, I get the flu shot every year. This year I didn't have a reaction, but usually I have mild flu-like symptoms for 24 hours. And that's just whatever. Maybe I take a sick day and then I'm fine. And it's better than getting the flu. So I just to me, it's just the cost of doing business, as they say, right? So I do it anyway, and I'll do the same with this COVID vaccine. I'm excited to have it, considering the restrictions that we've been put in by not being able to move freely and do what we want, right?
Certainly. I can't wait to get it as soon as it's offered.
What's the deal with all those mysterious monoliths appearing around the world?
This is so last year, Adam.
It is last year. It is also this year. Now, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens.
Okay.
Now, I wanted to talk about this a while back, but we've had less ability to do shows lately, and when we did, there were other things going on. But as this story kept developing, I think now we're at a point where things have calmed down a bit, that I can cover it and there won't be some big revelation by the time this episode hits your ears, though it's entirely possible there's some big reveal and that makes everything I'm talking about worthless. Now, what's happening basically is that mysterious monoliths have appeared in many locations, with the first appearing in the desert in Utah, referred to by some as the Utah monolith. Some context on why people think it's aliens. One can't help but think of the monolith from the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, one of my favorite films and one of my favorite books.
That monolith should have gotten an Oscar for that acting.
I'm not sure we're there yet, but maybe in the future.
Best supporting monolith?
They created a new category and then instantly canceled it. In the film, there are a number of monoliths, the first of which appears in the African savanna in a desert-like area. In the film and book of the same name, the monolith is placed there by an advanced alien civilization, which in the first story at least causes the ancestors of humans to go through a bit of an awakening, an evolutionary leap, if you would, which results in them learning how to use rudimentary tools. They end up taking bones, killing each other, basically. Now, there are two other monoliths in these stories. The one discovered on the moon near the lunar crater Tycho is called the Tycho Magnetic Anomaly, or TMA or TMA-1 in the story. And the one out in space near Jupiter in the film, Saturn in the book, is TMA-2, though it isn't actually near Tycho. It's not magnetic, but that's what they call it. Now, the one in Africa, unearthed nearly a millennia later, is referred to as TMA-0, though again, it is not near Tycho and is not magnetic, and they point that out in the book. So, one way or another, these monoliths remind people of the ones in the film, though they aren't really the same. The monolith in 2001 is a cuboid, a six-sided form in which all sides are rectangles and all angles are right angles.
The prophecy, the cuboids. Oh, it all comes together.
It's very important. Now, it is also black. So in the book, the ratio of the sides are all squares of integers, so 1, 4, 9. Though I don't believe the shape in the films fits perfectly with that, but that's an idea there, and I think it's also supposed to go in other dimensions with other squares as well. The Utah monolith is a triangular prism. So think of a standard light refracting prism, right? It's a triangle. The base is a triangle. There are 3 long rectangular sides. It's made of metal, probably stainless steel or aluminum, so it's not the same color as the 2001 monoliths. It's also technically not a monolith. So the word means something that is made of a single block of stone, and this is not carved out of stone or carved out of anything. One might argue that the 2001 monolith is also not a monolith, as it includes technology that is likely not carved out of a piece of rock, but something put together. Though exactly how the advanced civilization that creates it did so is not specified in any of the books or films, but...
So you're saying it's just a lith, not mono?
It's just, I don't know, it's just a cuboid. We should just call everything cuboids. So since that first one popped up, there have been a few more sightings. Darren, do you wish to take a guess as to how many have popped up or how many sightings there have been?
Yes, so I have to go back thinking of how many things were hitting the headlines. In a short period of time, I think there was at least 5.
Okay.
And now I'm wondering if there was a couple others I didn't know about.
Uh-huh.
So I will say 7.
Okay, 7. It's well over 100, almost 200.
So you're saying my number was off?
Just a bit. I like you. I wouldn't have thought it would have been over a dozen, but there are quite a bit.
100,
yeah.
200.
On the Wikipedia page, list of works similar to the 2020 Utah monolith accounted 121 instances. Some of those are the same one that was moved. On the Utah monolith mentions there are over 190 similar columns which have been erected around the world, and the website monolithtracker.com, because of course that's a thing, lists the total as being 191 as of February 7th when I prepared this segment and I last checked that website.
It'd be interesting to ask someone from the past if whether they think the Santa tracker or the monolith tracker is more real in late 2020, 2021.
Yeah. Well, I still don't know if monolith tracker is really getting as much attention as... Well, probably in February, so the Santa tracker is not getting a ton of attention. I don't know. So while we don't know who made the first one, we also don't know who made the other ones. With well over 100 of these, it seems unlikely that the same person did all of them. So some may be part of some organized prank, a viral art exhibit, or something of the sort. But some are surely copycats, which were inspired by the original to do the same. I wouldn't completely rule out some sort of organized online plot behind some of these. But if that were the case, it's still hard to know how many of those are part of the original planned activity, how many of these are copycats.
And
or
like
anything
not
that.
just the coordination, but the secrecy.
Oh, yeah. For them to coordinate and no one come to leak it now?
Well, it sounds like, look what I did. Ha, 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 right?
For sure. Which is why I tend to think that maybe the original was somewhat an isolated event and the rest were copycats. But it's hard to tell. It's very hard to tell. So let's forget about all these other monoliths for a moment. Let's focus on the main one. So the first one was spotted on the 18th of November by members of the Utah Department of Public Safety who were surveying the area in a helicopter. So it wasn't in a very well-traveled place. Now, it disappeared only 9 days later on November 27th. More on that disappearance later.
Disappeared? Is that that's very dramatic phrasing, Adam.
It just disappeared.
It did. There was a smoke bomb and then it disappeared.
So does that mean it was only there for a few days? Well, hardly. So people used Google Earth and were able to see that it had been there for some time. The so-called monolith is not there in August 2015, and it is there in October of 2016. So it showed up between those two dates, and it has been there for over 4 years.
So 4 years. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a very long time. So there was speculation that someone from the crew of the HBO show Westworld left the object there because some of the scenes were filmed sort of in the area. So they were filming in the area in 2016, and that would fit with when the item showed up. But there wasn't anything quite like it in the show, right? So if this was a prop that someone left over as a prank, and you say, oh yeah, you remember in episode 6 when Maeve did that thing with the monolith, but that didn't happen. There's nothing like that in the show. So.
I can see why that is appealing, though, because the people who made Westworld might be, at least some of them, the type of people to make a monolith and stick it in.
For sure. Someone in the prop department could probably whip this together in a lot less time than it would take me or you to do so.
Yes.
And they would have the ability to drive out in an hour and drop it somewhere or something, and it would be fun. So that's possible. That may be what's going on, and if it is, they're having a good laugh about it, and I'm amazed that they haven't fessed up to it yet. Right? And that's part of the mystery, right? So how plausible is this? And it's hard to put some numbers of this, but it's far from the sole likely explanation. So another theory is that artist John McCracken left the item there. McCracken was a minimalist sculptor and science fiction lover who died in 2011. So obviously the timelines aren't perfect here, with the object showing up years after his death. So the David Zwirner Gallery claims that this object was made by McCracken, and they've since sort of gone back on that idea. And Patrick McCracken, the artist's son, said that in May of 2002, his father mentioned that he would like for his artwork to be left in remote places to be discovered later. So that idea kind of fits. But does that mean that a plot to hide the object years after his death was involved, and that he didn't notify his art dealer, he did not notify his family or friends of it? Well, that's an elaborate plot, and then who did it? So that gets more complicated.
I could see, if you're a decently known artist, that it would be more fun to not tell anyone.
Yeah.
In the low probability but very delightful chance that they're going to discover it afterwards.
Maybe if you're like an artist and also like an Andy Kaufman style prankster, but I don't know enough about this artist to know if that's really the case. A friend of McCracken, James Hayward, said that he doesn't think it's likely, as the object found in the desert appears to have been bent with a machine called a brake, and John McCracken avoids machines and industrial fabrication in his pieces. Right? So there's some criticism like, that's kind of like cheap looking.
It's not art. It's not even a monolith.
His would have been a monolith, or he wouldn't have called it that.
Oh, right? That's true. Yes. Integrity. We need to bring back integrity to the monolithic world.
Yep. So we don't know who put it there at this point, but who took it away. Not aliens. Humans did. Humans took it away. We don't know. Aliens might have put it there. So 4 humans to be specific, and they were seen doing it. They knocked it over. They took it apart. They carried it off in wheelbarrows. So as the location of the monolith has been discovered thanks to Google Maps, there were a lot of other people that were there to see it at the time, and those who took it away were later identified as Andy Lewis, Sylvan Christensen, Homer Manson, and a 4th person who remains anonymous. They're a group of slackliners, so that means guys who basically they walk on these bands that are attached on things. It's like, I don't know, it's the new tightrope walking, I guess. Their explanation seems to be, to me, more nonsensical than the idea that it was aliens. Here's some quotes here. We removed the Utah monolith because there are clear precedents for how we share and standardize the use of our public lands. The mystery was the infatuation, and we want to use this time to unite people behind the real issue here. We are losing our public lands. Things like this don't help. It obviously can't stay there. It just can't, because it became a destination. We obviously don't want to take it. It's not ours. And we don't want to destroy it because it is art. Our decision as a crew was that the chaotic neutral decision was to remove it as fully intact as possible. I don't know if that's meant to be a Dungeons and Dragons reference, but
well, it is that 9-point lawful good chaotic neutral thing. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was in a spot where people weren't really supposed to hike, from what I recall.
Yes.
It is in a national park, and you can't just dump whatever you want there, even if you call it art. It's garbage in a way.
It is technically illegal to have that art there.
So it does serve as both, as I say, a destination where people are not really supposed to go, and as a precedent that more people would do such things.
Yeah. So I think they were concerned with like the foot traffic. They were concerned with the effect on the environment and things like which I get. It's just sort of an odd reason to take it, but here we are. So the monolith is now back in the custody of the Bureau of Land Management. So they ended up returning it sometime later. Following this whole thing, the second monolith popped up in eastern Romania. So this one wasn't as well made as the original. So Was this made by the same group of people or coordinated somehow, or was this simply a knockoff? Well, we don't really know. So this disappeared a few days later. Again, I say disappeared, but some human probably took it away. But we don't know. We don't know how or why. We don't know the specifics of that. Did the people who put it up remove it, or did someone just take it and put it in their dorm room or something like that? I don't know. Then the next one showed up in California. It was destroyed by far-right activists because I guess they thought Jesus didn't like the monoliths. Of course, he would be offended by it. I'm sure that we can find some reason to say it's a false idol or something like that. Next one popped up in Las Vegas, then Joshua Tree, California, and then it went on and on and on and on, and now we're 191 sightings later. There are probably others that people just haven't seen. It took 4 years for this one to pop up, right?
True.
So with so many popping up, it's nearly impossible to tell which, if any, are connected to the original. So some are surely copycats, right? There was one that was made out of gingerbread. That's probably a copycat. So if there was some coordination behind some of these, it would be really hard to tease out which ones, right? So if you had a really good look at all of them, you could maybe look at the craftsmanship. But even then, if I coordinated this with someone across the other side of the world, they might not even use the same techniques, materials, the exact same measurements as I did. So the important question, did aliens put any of them here? So of course this is nonsense. It's just not necessary to the explanation. I'm generally open to the idea of the existence of aliens somewhere in the galaxy, if not the universe at large.
Adam is very open to the idea.
So that said, there's been no compelling evidence that any intelligent extraterrestrial civilization has ever actually visited the Earth during the short time in which humans have been on the planet, or even before that. Even though a lot of people seem to speculate that there's not so strong evidence of it happen. Now, even assuming that the original monolith was aliens, does it make sense that the ones popping up since, which don't really look the same, were also aliens? So we can accept that humans probably made those. Can't we just accept that they made all of them? So this is sort of the opposite of, well, there's been so many, some of them must be aliens. Well, okay, well, if some of them aren't, can they all not be aliens? That's kind of my way of looking at it.
What's the simplest explanation here? Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps it's different aliens all using different techniques, right? Like hundreds of alien pranksters all using slightly different methods. This one's like, I'm going to make it out of gingerbread. What's gingerbread? Well, Earth humans make gingerbread houses out of blah, 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 right? Or they communicate that through thought or something like that.
Yes.
So the truth is, there's nothing unexplainable about sheets of bent metal popping up in the desert. The idea is like something out of a science fiction film, but aliens aren't necessarily to explain this. And also seems unlikely that aliens would do something very similar to a movie that came out 50-some years ago.
So you're saying Kubrick was an alien? He's obviously influenced by aliens to put the monolith in the movie, and now we see aliens making monoliths again, right? Checkmate, Adam.
Well, there's conflicting conspiracy theories here. Did Kubrick fake the moon landing, or did Kubrick collaborate with aliens? It could be both.
Or did the moon landing fake Kubrick?
Sure. In the end, we still don't know what this is. It seems quite plausible that this is an art piece which was put up to create attention. It seems to have done a very good job in doing so. Similarly, it could have been a prank for similar reasons. Alternatively, it could be part of some sort of deliberate viral marketing campaign to sell a product or to plug something in some way. But this having been in the desert for over 4 years means that this probably didn't work well as intended unless the creators had a very long-lasting plan to plug some product, right? So if you had a movie coming out, unless your movie was coming out in 10 years, why would you even do this, right? So all said, we don't know much. We know that many of these are likely unrelated, but we don't know which ones, if any, are related and how. And bears repeating that it's probably not aliens. That's right. I'm not saying it's aliens. But it's aliens.
Well done. So, I mean, I didn't think it was aliens. I didn't know there were more than 100, if not 2 of these things. It's interesting. No one has come forth. And then finally, yes, if someone says monolith, I think of the monolith from 2001 versus a large rock formation, which may not even be rectangular or cuboid at all. It could just be round, and that's also what a monolith is. So, I've learned a lot today, Adam, and thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. So we'll see. Hopefully someone does come forth, and then I don't know if we'll do another segment because it might not be that interesting. And be like, yeah, I did it. It was an art piece. That's the story. Like, there's not much to it, so we'll see.
But there would still be the coordination of the other 100
Yes, that would be interesting. That would be interesting for
Like
sure.
if it was planned ahead of time, that's interesting. If it wasn't, and there's that many copycats, that's also interesting to me.
Yeah, here's my secret forum I use to coordinate this whole thing. That could be very interesting, depending on how coordinated that is. We'll see. We'll keep an eye out for this one.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.